generally speaking, in the social sciences, we break down science into three different distinct groups. We have quantitative, qualitative, and critical cultural. So quantitative is based on numbers. Qualitative can involve numbers via mixed methodology, but is generally more about getting a sense of how people feel and then applying a numerical value to that. And then finally, we have critical cultural, which is something that cannot be measured. So when we talk about CRT, and from my extensive experience by reading CRT scholarship, and one of my big criticisms of CRT is that it's something that cannot be quantified in any measurable way, right? So if you look at CRT scholarship, and I would ask you if you have any kind of thing that would disagree with my perspective here, that CRT scholarship has no measurement towards it. There are experiences, they can be from teachers, they can be from people who have witnessed things, and it comes from a sort of journal is that I'm journaling my experiences. That's critical cultural. I'm writing down what I'm experiencing, but there's no measurement of these things, because one of the sort of primary contentions is that you can't measure some of this stuff because it's lived experiences. Correct?
Perhaps the critical race theory that I've read doesn't really deal much with lived experiences, but it could fall under the category. I mean, one of the things being, you're talking about social sciences. And
I'm asking you if you've seen statistical analysis in any piece of critical race theory that you've read.
Statistical analysis, like in terms of like actually doing the statistical analysis in the paper?
Yes, an ANOVA, a MANOVA, anything.
Well, I mean, so I'm reading scholarship in stuff that's published in law journals, which, you know, you're not going to find people doing stats in the paper there. People might be citing.
Sometimes you have to do stats to do a lodestar analysis.
I don't know what that is.
A lodestar analysis is how you determine how much you charge someone in legal documents.
Okay, so yeah, you might see that, but a lot of the critical race theory stuff is more focused on questions of constitutional interpretation, certain case laws, you know, the whether, you know, some principle has been satisfied, right? And so this is a lot more abstract philosophical type stuff, and the stuff that I'm squarely focused on is in the discipline of philosophy, especially when it comes to like moral theory, epistemology, and political theory. So that sort of stuff, definitely not going to find any quantitative or qualitative analysis there. It's just going to be more sort of argumentation. But so I mean, that, yes, I guess my answer is that I haven't, you know, I'm not a social scientist, and I don't really, I'm not experienced in the social science methodology. I haven't, you know, I haven't written a social science paper before.
That's fine. I don't. I wasn't trying to attack you on that. My only question is that how can we come to understand the world then if we're trying to apply these things that, so you're saying, like, for example, that systemic racism exists, which, by the way, I agree, it exists. I think individual and systemic racism are things that exist, and these can be problems. But let me ask you very, very clearly, because this was not answered after like 2.5, 3 hours, is what is CRT designed to do, and how can we use any kind of program, how can we use data, how can we use anything that we can actually calculate and make manifest physically in the real world to try and deal with this issue? First of all, I find it difficult that it's very hard to nail down the causal reasons for why we need CRT in the first place. But then as a manifestation of that, how do we then take off and fix these CRT issues? How do we fix this and make it go away? Or is that impossible?
I don't think it's impossible. I mean, there are critical race theorists who think that racism is permanent. But in terms of my answer would be, I don't see why critical race theory would necessarily either foreclose the possibility of being applied in a quantitative or qualitative way. I mean, you said that these scholars in certain social science fields who are doing critical race theory insist that it can only be that what it is interested in studying cannot be quantified.
Exactly.
If that's the case, that's probably either that's a silly approach and it's a needless restriction of the scope of critical race theory, or it's correct, and then what it ought to do is allow other rigorous forms of inquiry to fill those other two lanes, and critical race theory stay where it is.
Well, I would ask you this question because this is apparently your area of study. Now, I have read a lot of this, as I've explained, but have you personally come across any piece of critical race theory literature that deals in quantitative science, in numbers and statistics?
So again, critical race theory is not like a field of study in the sense that like you can get a degree in critical race theory.
That's not what I'm asking, though. That's not what I'm asking. So,
but you said it's my field of study. It's not my field of study is philosophy.
Okay, but this is okay. So I would say a sub area of interest. Okay, so my sub area of interest is media psychology. Okay, so if I was going to say like, can I quantify anything within media psychology? Absolutely, and I could point you to hundreds of papers that can quantify things within media psychology. Mm-hmm. What I'm still wondering is if, from your experience and your reading of the literature, is there anything within critical race theory that is quantifiable?
So sure. So right. Here's an example, and you tell me what you think. So there's this big paper published in Nature, I think in 2020, and it was a large scale analysis of over, I think, 10 million police traffic stops. Right.
Oh, I probably know the study you're talking about, but go ahead.
So I mean so if you know the study, right, they tried to control for certain things, right?
It's not 10 million, by the way, but okay. Yeah, I know the study you're talking about. I know the study you're talking about, but go ahead. It's not like 10 million. That's an insane amount of
let him finish.
Are you sure? Wait, are you sure?
Go ahead, sorry.
I actually thought that it was that number.
It could be. I could be wrong, but sorry. I am sorry. I'm sorry. Please continue.
It's okay. It's okay.
What's up, Aydin? We have to. This is a nice.
I'm sorry. I'm being rude. I'm sorry.
The stop and frisk one, I think, was 10 million. Maybe this.
Was it really?
Wow. Large scale analysis of racial disparities in police stops across the United States, and this was nearly 100 million traffic stops.
Oh,
okay. I just say stop them all, man. Just put a police checkpoint out there
across the country, and then they say they found that black drivers were less likely to be stopped after sunset when a veil of darkness masks one's race, suggesting some form of bias. I am not like skilled in the skills that you have as a social scientist to go through and evaluate it all on my own, but I see them definitely doing quantitative analysis.
Yes, well, we don't. Okay, that's not actually like. I mean, that study is something that could be used by CRT
scholars.
We
covered this in the debate, Aydin. We brought this up.
Well, I know you brought up this study. I forgot about this, though. I wouldn't know it was the same study. Yeah. I would say, though, my question would be, and this is a question that you need to ask in terms of any kind of social science study, is what is the alternative hypothesis? Okay, so is it possible that the reason why these black people were pulled over more
is that they drive worse? Or something.
No, it's not. It could be anything. It could be anything, sure. Or it could be the area. It could be that they're in a high crime area. There's more police presence there. So, in order for you to make the supposition that the reason why this was the case is because of racism, is applying some kind of motive there that is not actually represented by the data. Correct?
Of course, yeah, right.
So it could be any number of reasons why that number is skewed. And I admit it's terrible. I'm not a fan of the police. Like, by the way, Adam knows this. So we've recently discussed.
So watch out. Watch out. She's all ACAB.
But despite that, why I have an issue with the way that data like this are represented is because it takes a conclusion and applies that towards data when not necessarily that's the case. There could be multiple other variables involved, and in fact that is the most likely reality, that there's multiple variables going on there.
So is your claim then just that when it comes to racial issues, this sort of mistake happens more than in other areas of social science?
Oh, as a social scientist, social science is full of holes. The average level of our ability to replicate our own studies is something like 30%. I know you hate that number. It's something like 30%. I'm sorry I keep ragging on you, dude. But
me?
Oh, I'm ragging on Adam because of
me. 30%. Oh yeah.
30%.
That was a trigger number. She came on and started talking about some study, and I was like, that sounds like bullshit. Turns out it was bullshit. And
it was bullshit. I was wrong.
For some reason, I'm the bad guy.
No,
like
you're not
all
the
the
bad
comments,
guy.
all the comments are shut up, Adam, let Aydin talk. It's like,
no, well,
I was right.
I was right. The other reason I wanted to come on is to say that AT reigns supreme.
There we
'cause
go.
Adam's right.
Yes.
Oh,
Exactly.
hurtful.
Better
Jeez.
to be right. Better to be right ignorantly than not be right.
Quickly, Aydin, throw out a claim that I can disprove so you can come back to S class.
No. Come on.
But my point is that with that particular study is that there are multiple variables that can be true at once, right? It can be possible that cops are assholes. I'm more than willing to believe that. It's also possible that these cops, when these stops are happening, are in areas where there's high crime. And it is true that high crime areas also tend to be black. Now, most predominantly black in terms of origin. Now, would we say that that's because they are black and they're specifically being targeted because of their race? That's an option. Or is it because they're poor? That's an option. Or is it because of a multitude of factors? And I will tell you, as someone who has worked in the social sciences for 12 years, there is nothing that is explained by one variable. Nothing.
Yeah, it's all
in
multi-factor.
social sciences. It's a bunch of stuff every time.
Yeah,
So, should I see if there's any questions?
sure. If you want to read
Sorry.
some super chats too.
No, it's all
Sam,
good.
Sam, you're in agreement with us though, as far as like where, I mean, you're basically making an argument that there is some CRT that uses statistical analysis. Like our contention would be
I
that,
can't find any.
well, no,
and I
this
don't
is
believe-
Aiden.
I mean-
Our contention would
Sorry.
be that they're using other social science in CRT to make their CRT points, but it's not specifically CRT research. Like none of the researchers are going out and saying, okay, we're critical race scholars.
Right.
We have found this discrepancy that we believe is being caused by racism, and we're going to do some multi-factor analysis to determine that it is racism. There's no CRT scholars doing that. Correct, Sam?
That's what I would say, and that's why I emphasize like the broad nature of the sort of amorphous nature of what critical race theory is, because again, you can't pin down a 10 commandments of critical race theory.
Well, this
and
is
so insofar as people are even interested in studying this kind of thing, right? It seems like, well, there's this disparity. Maybe it's racism. If it is, then and we're approaching it through the possibility that it might be. We want to understand why in a racially, like in a society where the law is superficially race neutral, how might these racial disparities persist? And in that sense, there's a broad convergence with critical race theory.
now I made a tweet that was widely misunderstood and misrepresented by the pro CRT side. I said, I'm curious if critical race theory will get past the anti-science stance it currently has, since it calls empirical studies and methodological studies whiteness.
When you
right?
say that it does,
Well,
I think that's a little bit perhaps misrepresentative, because I don't think that that's representative of all critical race theorists.
Right. But critical race theory in its roots had an anti-science stance. It literally classifies science as whiteness and says the thing like you can't.
Dr. Katz in 1985 did. That's what's in the Smithsonian.
But let's not argue the point, because I want to make a different point.
Yeah, go
here.
ahead. Sorry.
I want to say that even though, and I understand you're contesting this, but even if the roots of critical race theory are anti-science, if it can get past this, maybe it can be of some use. And I use the example of Freud's, because Sigmund Freud, his methodology was garbage, like so anti-science, but he literally launched the whole field of psychology because people became interested in what he was doing, and they brought a methodological framework into psychology that made it work. It seems like we're at that point, but unless people who are in the critical race theory camp are really going to stress the fact that we need some sort of scientific way to validate our claims, then...
But it seems to me that most critical race theory is outside of the sciences entirely.
But that's a bad place to be.
We need science.
Why? No, I'm not. But I'm not saying. But the fact that you're outside
because you're
the
making empirical claims about the natural world. If you're making empirical claims about the natural world and you're basing it not on some kind of methodological science, then you're making religious claims. You're not making scientific claims.
Yes.
No, there's such a thing as social philosophy.
Oh, okay, but that is philosophy, and philosophy is not science.
Right.
Not empiricism.
And what
you
I'm
can
saying
have philosophy, but you can have philosophy, and that's fine. I absolutely have no issue with teaching philosophy in schools, but do not teach philosophy as if it is science, because philosophy and science are two completely different things. And that's the problem with CRT, is that it takes philosophy and applies it towards the scientific method, and thereby kind of removes the scientific method.
And this is why I was arguing James Lindsay is so anti-critical race theory, because James Lindsay is attacking the anti-science roots of critical race theory.